Do you know what it's like to live as an undocumented immigrant family? It's like walking on a thin thread, suspended in a sky full of storms. One wrong step, and the entire world could collapse. I lived in the shadow of that fear for the first 10 years of my life without even knowing I was running. My name is Elias, and this is the story of the days when I was a boy, living with my family in a hidden corner of California, where the radiant sunlight was never strong enough to dispel the gloom that enveloped us. I was born in Honduras, but my memories of that place are faded, like a painting losing its colors. I only remember the red dirt roads, the crowing of roosters every morning, and the acrid smell of smoke from the stove in my grandmother's small house. My mother told me we left Honduras when I was 5, and my little sister Rosa was only 3. My parents never explained exactly why we had to leave, only repeating that it wasn't safe anymore. I didn't understand what not safe meant. To a child, the world was simply days spent playing in the fields, nights listening to my mother's lullabies, and moments when my father would hoist me onto his shoulders, point to the starry sky, and say, "One day, you'll do something great." But California didn't have stars like that. We arrived on a moonless night, crammed into a truck where the air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear. I remember falling asleep on my mother's lap, waking up to the flickering neon lights outside the window. My father whispered to my mother, "Just a few months, and we'll be fine." My mother didn't respond, only gripped my hand and Rosa's tightly, as if she feared we'd vanish if she let go. Our first home was a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles, where the walls were so thin I could hear the neighbors' arguments every night. The neighborhood was full of people like us, immigrant families, faces always lowered when passing by police. My father worked in a garment factory 12 hours a day, sometimes 14. My mother took cleaning jobs, but only for families who didn't ask for papers. They paid her meager wages, but she never complained. "We have to survive, Elias," she said, her eyes tired but resolute. "Surviving is enough." I was 10 years old, a skinny boy with messy black hair and big curious eyes, always eager to learn about everything. I loved school. I loved the way my teacher smiled when I raised my hand to answer a question correctly. I loved the science books in the library where I could spend hours reading about planets and machines that could fly into the sky. School was the only place I felt I belonged. There I wasn't the immigrant's kid. I was just Elias, the boy who always topped the class in math and science. But at home, everything was different. My parents lived in another world, one where every doorbell, every police car passing by made them flinch. I still remember one evening when I was doing homework at the kitchen table and my father suddenly rushed in, turned off all the lights and pulled the curtains shut. "Don't move, Elias," he whispered, his voice trembling. I heard my mother pull Rosa into a corner, telling her not to cry. Outside, the blue and red lights of a police car flashed by, then disappeared. My father slumped into a chair, breathing heavily, as if he'd just escaped an invisible monster. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew enough not to ask. Asking only made my father angry, and when he was angry, he would yell, or worse, fall into a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush the entire house. Rosa, my little sister, was the only light in those dark days. She was 6 years old, tiny and delicate like a doll, with curly hair and a smile that could melt anything. Rosa didn't know about our parents' fears. She only knew the songs our mother taught her, played with her tattered cloth doll, and followed me everywhere. "Elias, tell me a story about Mars," she'd beg, and I'd make up tales about aliens living in glass cities. Rosa believed every word, her eyes sparkling as if I'd opened up an entire universe for her. But even Rosa couldn't chase away the growing shadow in our home. My parents spoke less and less. They argued more, often at night when they thought Rosa and I were asleep. I heard my mother cry, heard my father punch the wall, heard words like deportation, border, papers. I didn't fully understand, but I knew those words carried an invisible danger, like a venomous snake lurking in the dark. Once I heard my mother whisper, If they catch us, they'll take the kids away from us. My father replied, his voice bitter. Better that than letting them die in Honduras. I began to realize that my family was running from something, but I didn't dare ask. Every time I tried to mention Honduras, my mother would change the subject, and my father would give me a cold look, as if I'd touched an unhealed wound. I learned to stay silent, to lower my head when passing people in uniforms, to never talk about my family with anyone at school. But deep down, I was still a 10-year-old boy, dreaming of stars and flying machines. The tension in our home grew heavier. My parents started distrusting everyone, neighbors, friends, even relatives nearby. Don't talk to anyone, Elias, my mother warned, her voice firm. People will betray us. I didn't understand why she was so afraid. Our neighbors, Uncle Juan and Aunt Maria, were always kind to me and Rosa. Uncle Juan even gave me candy whenever I helped him fix his bicycle. But my mother trusted no one. They could report us to the police at any moment, she said, her billy eyes flashing with a fear I'd never seen before. Once I accidentally dropped my mother's favorite glass cup. It shattered on the kitchen floor and she screamed, not because of the cup, but because the noise might draw the neighbors' attention. "Do you want us all to get caught?" she yelled, gripping my shoulders so tightly it hurt. I stood frozen, tears welling up but not daring to fall. My father walked in, looked at me with disappointment, then turned away without a word. Rosa ran to me, hugging my leg, whispering, "Don't be scared, Elias. I'll find a new cup for Mommy." But I knew no cup could erase the fear in my mother's eyes. I started feeling like a burden. I wanted to make my parents happy, to see them smile like they did back in Honduras, but I didn't know how. I tried studying hard, bringing home A+ grades to show my mother, but she only nodded, her eyes empty. I told my father about my dream of becoming a scientist, but he just muttered, "What's the point of studying, Elias? If they find us, it's all over." Those words cut into me like a knife. I began to wonder, had I done something wrong? Why had my parents changed? Why didn't they look at me anymore with the love and hope they once had? I didn't know that in the world my parents were living in, love and hope had long been suffocated by fear. Our tiny apartment became an invisible prison. Rosa and I were forbidden from playing outside after 4 in the afternoon because people might see. My parents wouldn't let us go to school camp or friends' birthday parties. "We're not like other people, Elias," my father said, his voice low like a warning. "You have to understand that." But I didn't understand. I just wanted to be like other kids, to run freely, to talk about my family without fear. I wanted my parents to smile, for Rosa to grow up in a home free of shadows. I didn't know that one innocent word from me would cause everything to collapse, pushing our family into a storm that no one could escape. It was an ordinary Tuesday, with golden sunlight stretching across the streets leading to my elementary school. I walked into class, my worn-out backpack swinging on my shoulder, still buzzing from the A+ I got on yesterday's math test. My teacher, Ms. Miller, was a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and round glasses that always slid down her nose. She called me her little scientist because I was always asking about planets and rockets. That day, she started the lesson with a surprise question, as if she just wanted to liven up the classroom. "Kids, today we're going to talk about family," Ms. Miller announced, waving her hand like an actor on stage. "Who wants to share what their parents do?" The class buzzed with excitement. Tommy raised his hand, bragging that his dad was a firefighter. Sarah said her mom was a baker and even brought a cookie to show off. I sat quietly as always, not wanting to draw attention. My parents had told me 100 times, "Don't talk about our family, Elias. No one needs to know." But that day, something in Ms. Miller's voice and the way the class laughed and joked made me feel like I wanted to be part of that world too. I wanted to be like Tommy, like Sarah, to talk about my parents without fear. I raised my hand, my heart pounding. Ms. Miller smiled and pointed at me. "Elias, I knew you'd have an interesting story. What do your parents do?" I hesitated, trying to find a safe answer. But in my mind, the warnings from my parents, "Don't say anything," were drowned out by images of my mother scrubbing floors, my father coming home with calloused hands from the sewing machine. I wanted to say something that would make the class gasp, to prove that my family was special too, even if I didn't understand why we had to live in the shadows. "My parents," I began, my voice small but clear. "They escaped from the border because Honduras was really dangerous. They work really hard to take care of me and my sister." The class went silent for a second, then a few kids burst out laughing. "Escaped from the border? Like in a movie?" Tommy shouted, and the laughter grew louder. Ms. Miller raised her hand to quiet everyone, but her eyes had changed. Gone was the warm smile, replaced by a strange look, as if she was trying to process what I'd just said. "Thank you, Elias," she said, her voice soft but off somehow. "Who wants to share next?" I sat down, my face burning. I didn't understand why the class laughed, but I knew I'd done something wrong. That mistake clung to me all day like a heavy stone in my stomach. When the bell rang to end the school day, I ran home, trying to forget what I'd said. I told myself, it was just one sentence, it's not a big deal. But I was wrong. 3 days later, I realized that a single sentence could bring an entire world crashing down. That morning started like any other. My mother woke up early, preparing breakfast with corn tortillas and beans, the only food we could afford with the little money she earned. My father had left for work before sunrise, leaving the house as silent as a tomb. Rosa sat on the floor, clutching her cloth doll, softly singing a song our mother often sang. I was tying my shoelaces, getting ready for school, when a knock came at the door. The knock wasn't loud, but it made my mother freeze. She was standing in the kitchen holding a ladle, but her eyes looked like she'd just seen a ghost. "Elias, Rosa, go to your room now," she whispered, her voice trembling. I pulled Rosa into a corner of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what was happening, but the way my mother crouched low, tiptoeing toward the door, made me feel like a monster was standing outside. My mother peeked through the peephole, then turned back, her face pale as death. "Police?" she whispered, almost inaudibly. Rosa clung to me, her doll falling to the floor. I wanted to ask what was going on, but my throat was dry and no words came out. The knocking came again, louder this time. "Open the door. This is Immigration and Customs Enforcement." A deep voice boomed from outside. My mother stepped back, clutching her chest as if she might collapse. I'd never seen her so terrified. She ran to us, knelt down, and grabbed me and Rosa by the shoulders. "Listen to me. Don't say a word. Not a single word. Understand?" I nodded, but my mind was a mess. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. What was that? Why were they here? I looked at Rosa, saw her trembling, and tried to smile to reassure her, even though I was panicking too. My mother opened the door, and 3 men in uniform stepped inside. They were tall, their faces cold, carrying folders and radios that crackled with static. One of them, with short hair and eyes sharp as knives, spoke. "Are you Sofia Martinez? We need to see your and your family's documents." My mother stammered, trying to say something in English, but her voice shook so much I could barely understand her. We haven't done anything wrong," she said, clutching the edge of her shirt. The man didn't respond, just handed her a piece of paper. "This is a summons. You and your family need to appear in immigration court next week. Have your documents ready." I didn't know what an immigration court was, but I knew it wasn't good. My mother nodded, taking the paper with trembling hands, and the men left, leaving the house in suffocating silence. Rosa started crying, and my mother pulled her into her arms, whispering comforting words. She didn't believe herself. I stood there, frozen, feeling like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. My father came home late that night, when it was already pitch black outside. Rosa and I were sitting on the bed, trying to sleep but unable to. My mother's voice carried from the living room as she recounted everything to my father, each word like a hammer striking my heart. "They know, Carlos," she said, her voice breaking. "They know we don't have papers. They're going to deport us." My father didn't respond right away. I heard him sigh, then the sound of a chair being shoved aside. "Who said something?" he roared, his voice thick with anger. "Who betrayed us?" I lay there, my heart pounding, barely daring to breathe. I thought about what I'd said in class, about the way the class laughed, about Ms. Miller's strange look. Could it have been because of me? I tried to push the thought away, telling myself it wasn't possible. I was just a kid, I'd only said one innocent sentence. How could one sentence cause something this big? But the next morning, everything became clearer. My father called me into the living room where my mother sat with red, swollen eyes. Rosa was told to stay in the bedroom, but I knew she was listening behind the door. My father looked at me, his eyes like a cold blade. "Elias," he said, his voice low and terrifying. "What did you say at school?" I swallowed hard, feeling like a rock was lodged in my throat. I just said that you and Mom escaped from Honduras because it was dangerous," I whispered, unable to meet his eyes. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence, as if the entire room stopped breathing. Then my mother burst into tears, covering her face. "Oh God, Elias, why would you say that? Do you want us all to get caught?" Her voice broke, a mix of anger and despair. I stood, frozen, tears streaming down my face, but I didn't dare cry out loud. I wanted to explain, to say I didn't know, that I just wanted to brag about my parents like the other kids. But no words came out. My father stood up and stepped toward me. I thought he might hit me like he did when he was angry before. But he just looked at me, his eyes full of disappointment and coldness. "You've destroyed everything, Elias," he said, each word like a cut. "You betrayed your family." I wanted to scream that I didn't mean to, that I didn't understand, but the looks from my father, from my mother, made me feel smaller and guiltier than ever. Rosa ran out from the bedroom, hugging me and sobbing. "Elias didn't do anything wrong. Don't yell at him," she cried, but my mother pulled her away, telling her to be quiet. From that day on, my parents stopped looking at me the same way. They didn't talk to me, didn't scold me, didn't comfort me. They were just silent. And that silence was more terrifying than any shouting. I became a ghost in my own home, a criminal no one wanted to acknowledge. Rosa still secretly held my hand, whispering that she wasn't mad at me, but that only made the pain worse. What had I done to make my family so afraid? The days that followed passed in a suffocating atmosphere. My parents scrambled to prepare for the immigration court, but they didn't tell me anything. They whispered to each other at night, talking about things I didn't understand. Lawyers, deportation, repatriation. I heard my mother cry more, heard my father punch the wall, heard the blame that I knew was aimed at me. If Elias hadn't said anything, maybe they wouldn't have found us, my mother muttered one night, thinking I was asleep. I started to hate myself. I hated my foolish mouth, hated the innocence that had put my family in danger. I lay in bed, staring at the stained ceiling, wondering, if I hadn't said anything, would things be different? Would my parents smile at me again, hug me like they used to? I didn't know that what was coming would be far worse than their silence. The court date approached. My parents wore the neatest clothes they had, an old shirt of my father's and a dress my mother borrowed from Aunt Maria. They didn't tell me what would happen, but I could feel the tension in their every movement. Rosa held my hand, asking softly, "Elias, what are they going to do to us?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just squeezed her hand and said, "Everything will be okay, Rosa." But I didn't believe my own words. That day, as we walked into the courthouse, it felt like stepping into a nightmare. The cold white walls, the uniformed people with scrutinizing eyes, and the whispers of other families awaiting their fates. My parents sat up straight, but I saw my mother's hands tremble as she clutched my father's. Rosa sat beside me, hugging her doll, her wide eyes scanning the room. And then, the man in the black robe, the judge, read a long paper filled with words I didn't understand. But one word kept repeating, like a hammer striking my heart. Deportation. I looked at my parents, hoping they'd say something, do something to change it all. but they just sat there, motionless like stone statues. When we left the courthouse, my mother hugged Rosa and cried. My father said nothing, only gripped my hand tightly, not to comfort me, but out of desperation. I knew from that moment everything had changed forever, and I, a 10-year-old boy, was the one who had unknowingly set it all in motion. On the way home, no one said a word. My father drove the old truck, its engine groaning as if mourning on our behalf. Rosa sat beside me in the back seat, clutching her cloth doll, her wide eyes filled with confusion. She whispered, "Elias, what's deportation?" I wanted to answer, to say something to comfort her, but my throat tightened. How could I explain when I didn't fully understand myself? I just held her hand, squeezing it tightly, and whispered, "Don't be scared, Rosa. I'm here with you." But I was scared, so scared it felt like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. I glanced at my father through the rearview mirror, hoping to catch his eye, hoping he'd turn around and say everything would be okay. But he didn't look at me. No one did. I felt like a ghost, as if I'd become invisible in my own family. The days after the court hearing were an endless string of tension and silence. Our tiny apartment, already cramped and gloomy, now felt like a true prison. My parents no longer argued at night. They didn't speak at all. They just worked, prepared, and whispered plans I wasn't allowed to know. I overheard fragments, words like plane tickets, Honduras, voluntary repatriation. Each word was a cut to my heart, a reminder that everything I knew, this home, my school, my dreams of Mars, was about to vanish. My parents no longer looked at me with love. Instead, their gazes were cold, filled with blame. My mother stopped singing lullabies to Rosa, stopped stroking my hair while I did homework. My father no longer spoke of stars or the great things I'd do. They treated me like a traitor, someone who had destroyed their American dream. I wanted to scream that I didn't mean to, that I was just a 10-year-old boy, that I didn't know my innocent words would lead to this disaster. But every time I opened my mouth, my father's look silenced me. Rosa was the only one who didn't change. She still followed me around, still held my hand when Mom wasn't looking, still whispered innocent questions. "Elias, can we stay here? I don't want to leave school." I didn't know how to answer. I just hugged her, trying to hide my own fear, and said, "I'll protect you, Rosa. I promise." But I didn't know how to keep that promise. A week after the court hearing, my parents called Rosa and me into the living room. It was the first time they'd spoken directly to me since ICE came to our house. My father sat in a chair, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes fixed on the floor as if he couldn't bear to look at us. My mother leaned against the wall, her eyes swollen from crying. Rosa held my hand, her cloth doll pressed tightly against her chest. "We have to leave," my father said, his voice low and dry. "The court has decided. We have 30 days to leave the U.S. If we don't, they'll arrest us." My heart stopped. Leave the U.S.? Leave my school, my science books, my dreams of rockets and Mars? I wanted to ask why, to beg them to find a way to stay, but my father's look stopped me. He continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're going back to Honduras. Your mother has bought plane tickets. We leave next weekend." Rosa burst into tears, clinging to me. "I don't want to go. I want to stay here," she screamed, her voice breaking, politician breaking. My mother knelt down, hugging Rosa, but said nothing. I looked at her, hoping she'd say it was just a joke, that we'd find a way to stay. But she just bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "So, what will we do in Honduras?" I asked, my voice trembling. It was the only question I dared to voice. My father looked at me for the first time since the court hearing. But his eyes weren't those of a father. They were filled with disappointment and resentment. "We'll live," he said coldly, "like we did before." I wanted to say I didn't remember Honduras, that America was my home, that I didn't want to leave everything I loved. But I didn't dare. I just nodded, feeling like a part of me was dying. The following days passed in a haze. My parents were busy packing, selling off things we couldn't take. The old kitchen table, the TV with a broken corner, a few clothes my mother had carefully mended. They did everything mechanically as if they'd accepted their fate. But for me, every item sold was a piece of our life torn away. I stopped going to school. My parents said it wasn't necessary, that it won't matter when we're leaving soon. I sat in my room staring at the science books I loved, wondering if there'd be libraries in Honduras where I could read them. Rosa sensed my sadness. She brought her doll, placed it in my lap and said, "Elias, this doll is coming with us. It'll remind me of this house." I smiled at her, but the smile hurt more than tears. I didn't want Rosa to remember this house as a distant memory. I wanted her to grow up here, to go to school, to sing happy songs. But I had no say in the matter. I was just a 10-year-old boy who had destroyed everything with one foolish sentence. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed hearing my mother's soft sobs from the living room. My father didn't comfort her as he usually did. He just sat there, silent like a shadow. I wanted to run out, to hug her and say I was sorry, that I'd do anything to fix my mistake. But I knew nothing could be fixed. The day we left the apartment, a light rain fell. The tiny drops pattered on the truck's roof as if crying for us. My parents packed only 2 small suitcases, holding everything left of our life in America. Rosa clung to her doll and I carried an old science book, the only one I couldn't bear to leave behind. We got into the truck heading to the airport and no one said a word. At the Los Angeles airport, a chill ran down my spine. The airport was vast, crowded with the hum of announcements and the rush of people. My parents led us through the crowd, their faces tense and exhausted. I held Rosa's hand, trying to keep her calm, though I was trembling myself. I didn't know what awaited us in Honduras, but I knew it wouldn't be like anything I'd dreamed of. My father stopped in the waiting area, turning to me. "Elias, sit here and don't wander off," he said, his voice flat. "Your mother and I are taking Rosa to get some water." I nodded, though something felt wrong. I watched my mother lead Rosa away, her doll dangling in her hand. My father stood there for a moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he turned and followed them. I sat on the chair, clutching my science book, trying to focus on the words about Mars, but my mind was a mess. Time passed. 5 minutes, 10, 20. I started to worry. Why were they taking so long? I stood up, scanning the crowded waiting area, searching for them. But they weren't there. Not at the water stand, not at the gift shop, nowhere. A cold dread gripped my chest. I ran to the information desk, my voice shaking as I asked the staff member, "The flight to Honduras, has it taken off?" The woman looked at me, her eyes full of pity. "That flight left 10 minutes ago," she said. "Where's your family?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I ran through the waiting area, calling for my mother, my father, Rosa, but only my own voice echoed back. They were gone. They'd boarded the plane, leaving me behind. I collapsed into a chair, tears streaming uncontrollably. My science book fell to the floor, open to a page about Mars, the place I'd once dreamed of reaching. But now that dream felt further away than ever. My parents had abandoned me. They'd chosen to leave without me, and Rosa, my little sister, was gone with them. An airport worker approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay, sweetie?" "Where's your family?" she asked, her voice gentle but worried. I didn't answer. I just sat there, sobbing, feeling like the world had collapsed. I didn't know that my parents' cruel decision wasn't just punishment for my mistake. It was the beginning of a long journey, where I would have to find a way to rise from the ashes of my own life. Tears blurred everything. The airport announcements, the bustling crowd, the glaring neon lights. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I clutched my science book, its crumpled pages about Mars trembling under my shaking fingers. It was the only thing left, the only reminder that I once had a family, a home, a dream. The woman at the airport, she said her name was Linda, sat beside me, her voice gentle as if trying to pull me out of the darkness. "What's your name?" she asked. Elias, I whispered, my voice choked. Elias Martinez. All right, Elias, we'll figure out how to help you. Do you have anyone we can contact? Aunts, uncles, family friends? I shook my head. My parents never spoke about relatives in the US. They were always afraid, always telling me not to trust anyone. I had no phone numbers, no addresses, nothing but the book in my hands and the memory of my father's cold gaze before he disappeared. Linda called someone over her radio, and soon after a man in a uniform arrived, along with a woman in a gray suit. They talked about unaccompanied minors and child services. I didn't understand everything, but I knew I was being taken somewhere. Somewhere unfamiliar, without my parents, without Rosa. They put me in a car, and I sat in the back, staring out the window. Los Angeles passed by in a blur of lights, the once familiar streets now belonging to another world. I thought of Rosa, her smile, the way she hugged her doll and sang the songs our mother taught her. Was she crying? Was she asking for me? And my parents. Why did they do this? Why did they leave me behind? I wanted to scream, to pound on the car window, to run back to the airport and find them. But I just sat there motionless, feeling like a part of me had died. The Children's Care Center was a gray, dreary building on the outskirts of the city. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a warehouse, with peeling walls and long, echoing hallways. I was taken to a small room where a woman named Mrs. Carter asked me a barrage of questions. How old was I? Who were my parents? Did I know where they went? I answered in short, monotone sentences as if reciting a lesson. I didn't want to talk about my parents. Every time I thought of them, I saw my father's accusing eyes, heard my mother's sobs, and felt guilt like a knife twisting in my heart. Mrs. Carter took notes, then led me to a dormitory. The room had 6 bunk beds, a few rusty lockers, and a small window overlooking a parking lot. The other kids in the room looked at me with curious eyes, but no one spoke. I was given clean clothes, a thin blanket, and a bed in the corner. Rest now, Elias, Mrs. Carter said. We'll sort things out for you tomorrow. I lay on the bed, my science book tucked under my pillow. The steady snoring of a boy in the next bed filled the air, but I couldn't sleep. I thought of Rosa, wondering if she was scared, if she was clutching her doll and calling my name. I thought of my parents, wondering if they regretted leaving me behind. And I thought of myself, a 10-year-old boy abandoned in a strange country with no idea what tomorrow would bring. The first days in the care center were a whirlwind of unfamiliarity and fear. I wasn't used to living with other kids, each with their own stories, but all carrying a sadness like mine. There was a boy named Jake, 12 years old, who always clutched a necklace as if it was the only thing keeping him sane. There was a girl named Mia, a year younger than me, who sat in the corner drawing strange pictures filled with black. No one talked much. We were like ghosts moving silently in a world that didn't belong to us. I was bullied within the first week. A group of 3 older kids led by a boy named Derek targeted me. They called me the immigrant kid, stole my bread at mealtime, and once tore the first page of my beloved science book. I didn't fight back. I just lowered my head, swallowing my tears, telling myself that if I stayed quiet, they'd get bored and leave me alone. But they didn't stop. Every time they shoved me against a wall, every time I heard their mocking laughter, I felt smaller, more worthless. I started shutting myself off. I didn't talk to anyone, didn't join the group activities the staff organized. I just sat in the room rereading my science book, though the words about Mars now only brought me pain. I wondered if there was a planet out there for kids like me, kids who were abandoned, forgotten. I scribbled notes in the margins of the book. Rosa, I'm sorry. Mom, Dad, why? But no one answered. Time passed and I was moved from one care center to another. Each place was the same. Cold walls, creaky bunk beds, unfamiliar faces. I was brought to meet potential foster families, but no one wanted me. He's too quiet, they said. He has emotional scars. I didn't know what emotional scars meant, but I knew it had to do with the way I didn't smile, didn't talk, didn't look people in the eye. I knew it had to do with the pain in my heart, a pain I couldn't put into words. By the time I was 13, I had nearly given up hope. I'd been in the foster system for 3 years and no family wanted me long term. I started to think I'd always be a kid who didn't belong anywhere, a ghost drifting from place to place. But then one day I was taken to meet a family in San Diego, the Garcias. Mrs. Elena Garcia was a Mexican woman with long black hair and a smile as warm as sunlight. Her husband, Mr. Miguel, was a mechanic with calloused hands but kind eyes. They had a daughter, Isabella, only 5 years old, who ran around the house with infectious laughter. When I stepped into their home, I felt a strange sensation, as if I'd entered a world I didn't deserve. "Elias, welcome," Mrs. Elena said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You can call me Mama Elena, okay?" I nodded but said nothing. I didn't dare trust. I'd seen too many families seem kind only to reject me after a few weeks. But Mama Elena was different. She was patient, never pushing me to talk or smile. She cooked hot meals, tamales, enchiladas, and always saved the biggest portion for me. Mr. Miguel taught me how to fix bicycles. Even though I was so clumsy, I dropped tools everywhere. Isabella followed me around, calling me Brother Elias and shoving her scribbled drawings into my hands. Slowly, I began to open up. Not because I wanted to, but because Mama Elena had a way of melting the walls I'd built around myself. One evening, as I read my science book in the living room, she sat beside me. "You like Mars, huh?" she asked, pointing at the page. I nodded, hesitant. "I wanted to be a scientist. Before." "Before?" she asked gently. "What about now?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of my parents, of Rosa, of the airport, of the years in darkness. Now. "I don't know anymore," I whispered. Mama Elena didn't press me to say more. She just placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. "Elias, you don't have to know right now. But I believe you'll find your path. And I'll be here, okay?" For the first time in 3 years, I felt a tiny spark of hope. It was fragile, easily broken, but it was there. When I was 14, the Garcias officially adopted me. It was the first time I had a real home since being abandoned. Mama Elena and Mr. Miguel didn't try to replace my parents, but they gave me something I'd lost long ago, a sense of safety. I started going to school again, and this time I excelled more than ever. I fell in love with technology, with lines of code that could turn ideas into reality. At school, I earned a small scholarship, then a bigger one. I started dreaming again, not of Mars, but of a future where I could stand on my own. But even with Mama Elena's help in healing parts of me, the wound in my heart remained. Every night I lay in bed thinking of Rosa. Where was she? Was she safe? And my parents? Did they ever think of me? I wrote letters I never sent, pouring my pain and questions onto paper. "Rosa, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. Mom, Dad, why did you leave me?" I didn't know that years later I would find answers. But first I had to learn to survive, to rise from the darkness, and to believe that I deserved a better future. When I was 16, I was accepted into a high school specializing in science and technology in San Diego. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The school wasn't just classrooms, it was a world of ideas, machines, and lines of code that could turn dreams into reality. I was captivated by computers, by how numbers and symbols could create something alive, a program, an app, a new world. Every evening I sat in my room under the dim light of a desk lamp, coding on an old computer Mr. Miguel had bought from a second-hand shop. "You'll do great things, Elias," he said, patting my shoulder. "I see the spark in your eyes." At school, I was an outstanding student. I studied harder, joined tech clubs, and earned a full scholarship to UC Berkeley, one of the top universities for technology. The day I received my acceptance letter, Mama Elena hugged me and cried, while Mr. Miguel opened a bottle of soda and declared, "Today is Elias's day." Isabella danced around the house, shouting that she'd become an astronaut to meet brother Elias on Mars. I laughed, but deep down I wondered if Rosa ever got to experience moments like this. UC Berkeley was a whole new world. Vast lecture halls, libraries brimming with books and students from all over the globe. I felt small, like a grain of sand in an ocean, but also determined. I chose computer science as my major, and every day I dove into studying coding and group projects. But I didn't just want to learn. I wanted to create something meaningful, something that could help kids like me. Kids who grew up in the shadows, without family, without hope. In my sophomore year, I teamed up with two friends, Priya and Jamal, to start a project. Our idea was an educational app for kids in the foster system, a platform offering free lessons, mental health guidance, and connections to mentors. I named it Bright Path, a path of light, because I wanted kids like me to have a way forward even when they felt lost. Priya, an Indian girl with a radiant smile, handled the interface design. Jamal, a black guy with an endless sense of humor, took on marketing. And I coded day and night, forgetting to eat or sleep, as if each line of code was a way to atone for my past mistakes. But starting a company wasn't easy. Our first version failed miserably. The app was buggy, no one downloaded it, and we ran out of money after 6 months. Priya and Jamal wanted to give up, but I couldn't. I remembered the nights in the care center, lying on a bunk bed, clutching my science book and dreaming of a better future. I didn't want other kids to feel that despair. "We'll do it again," I told them, my voice firm. "We have to make it work." We started over, fixed bugs, improved the app, and sought investors. One day at a startup conference in San Francisco, I stood before hundreds of people and told my story. Not about my parents or the airport, but about the kids in the foster system, the kids who needed a chance. I wasn't used to public speaking, but as I spoke, I felt a fire ignite inside me. "Bright Path isn't just an app," I said. "It's a promise that no child gets left behind." An investor, a woman named Karen Lee, approached us after the presentation. She said my story had touched her heart, and she wanted to invest. With her funding, we expanded Bright Path, added new features, and partnered with nonprofits. Our app was downloaded thousands of times, featured in the press, and even appeared on a local TV show. By the time I was 28, Bright Path had become a multi-million-dollar company, and I, Elias Martinez, the boy abandoned at the airport, had become a self-made millionaire. Success came quickly, but it didn't erase the scars in my heart. I bought an apartment in San Francisco with windows overlooking the bay, but every night I lay in bed thinking of Rosa. I still wrote letters I never sent, pouring my pain and questions onto paper. "Rosa, are you okay? Do you remember me? Mom, Dad, do you ever regret it?" I didn't talk about my biological family with anyone, not even Priya or Jamal. When reporters asked about my past, I only spoke of Mama Elena, Mr. Miguel, and Isabella, the people who gave me a new family. But deep down, I knew I hadn't fully escaped the darkness. One day, I received a letter from the immigration department. After years of working, contributing to the community, and being sponsored by a nonprofit, I officially became a legal U.S. citizen. The day I held my citizenship certificate, I stood in front of a mirror, looking into the eyes of a 28-year-old man, no longer the 10-year-old boy left behind. Mama Elena hugged me and cried, saying she was proud of me. Mr. Miguel opened a bottle of soda, just like the day I got into Berkeley. Isabella, now a teenager, drew a picture of me standing on a red planet with the words, "Brother Elias, Mars scientist." I smiled, but inside I felt an emptiness. Success, money, citizenship, none of it could fill the void of being abandoned. I knew that to truly move forward, I had to face my past. I had to return to Honduras to find my parents and Rosa, not to forgive, but to let them know who I had become despite everything. The decision to return to Honduras came during a sleepless night, as I sat in my luxurious San Francisco apartment, gazing out at the bay twinkling with lights. I was 30 years old, a millionaire, a U.S. citizen, someone the press called a tech phenomenon. But in the mirror, I still saw the 10-year-old boy clutching a science book at the airport, waiting for a family that never came back. I couldn't keep running from that boy. I had to face him, and them. I began preparing but didn't tell anyone, not even Mama Elena, Priya, or Jamal. This was my journey alone, a pilgrimage to close a painful chapter of my life. I contacted a nonprofit in Honduras offering to fund a library project for a school in a poor rural area. The school I had attended before we left. It was an excuse to return, a way to hide my true purpose, finding my parents and Rosa. I didn't want them to know I was coming, didn't want them to prepare. I wanted them to see me, Elias Martinez, the man I had become, and face the choice they made years ago. The plane landed in Tegucigalpa on a sweltering morning, the smell of red earth and dust filling my nostrils as I stepped out of the airport. Honduras wasn't like the faded memories I had. The bumpy roads, noisy markets, and ramshackle houses felt both familiar and foreign. I traveled with a small group from the nonprofit, posing as an anonymous donor, but inside, I was a boy searching for his way back home. My village, a small place nestled among hills, was as poor as it had been 20 years ago. The red dirt roads were now muddy from rain, and the tin-roofed houses creaked under the sun. I visited my old elementary school where I used to sit under a thatched roof listening to the teacher talk about the world beyond. The school was now a crumbling row of buildings with children in patched uniforms, but their eyes lit up when they saw us bring books and computers. I stood before the classroom introducing the library project, but my mind was elsewhere. I looked out at the schoolyard where I used to play with Rosa, wondering if she still remembered this place. After the ceremony, I spoke to an elderly teacher, Ms. Anna, the only one left from my time here. "Do you know the Martinez family?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Carlos and Sofia Martinez, they used to live here." Ms. Anna looked at me, her eyes wary but softening. "Martinez? They came back here years ago after leaving the U.S. They live at the edge of the village in a small shack. But their life hasn't been easy, young man." My heart tightened. I didn't ask more, just thanked her and left. I didn't want Ms. Anna to know who I was, didn't want anyone to know. I needed to see my parents with my own eyes, to face them before they saw me. That night I stayed at a small guest house in the village, lying on a hard bed, listening to the hum of insects outside the window. I took out my science book and flipped to the page about Mars where I had once scribbled, "Rosa, I'm sorry." I wondered if my parents ever thought of me, if they ever wondered whether I was still alive. And Rosa? Where was she? Was she safe? Was she happy? The next day I walked to the edge of the village, to the place Ms. Anna had described. My parents' shack was hidden behind a row of trees, small and dilapidated, with a leaky tin roof and cracked mud walls. I stood there, a few meters away, peering through the sparse fence. A frail woman with gray, disheveled hair sat outside, mending an old shirt. It was my mother. Inside, I heard a man's rasping cough, my father. They had aged so much, as if time had drained their vitality. I didn't feel anger, didn't feel pain, only a cold emptiness in my chest. I turned away, not letting them see me. I needed time to prepare, to sort through my emotions before facing them. I hadn't come here to cry, nor to beg for love. The next day, I returned to the shack, armed with an excuse. I was a representative from a nonprofit, there to survey the needs of the villagers. I wore a simple shirt, hiding any signs of my success. No expensive watch, no smartphone. I wanted them to see me as a stranger, at least at first. My mother opened the door, her eyes tired but wary. "Hello, sir," she said, her voice hoarse. "Who are you looking for?" "I'm a representative from a charity organization," I said, keeping my tone even. "We're helping the village, and I'd like to ask about your family." She nodded and invited me in. Inside the shack, the smell of dampness and old tobacco hit me. My father sat on a wooden chair, coughing harshly, his face gaunt and his eyes clouded with illness. I barely recognized them, the father who once carried me on his shoulders, the mother who sang me to sleep. They were now just two old people, beaten down by life. I sat down, asking simple questions. How were they living? Did they need anything? They answered curtly, their voices laced with suspicion. "We have nothing," my father said, his trembling hand holding a cigarette. We just get by. My mother looked at me as if trying to find something familiar, but she didn't recognize me. How could they? The 10-year-old boy was now a 30-year-old man with neatly combed hair and a confident voice. After a few minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I looked straight into my mother's eyes, then my father's, and said, "I'm not a stranger. I'm Elias Martinez, the son you left behind at the airport 20 years ago." Silence. A heavy silence, as if the world stopped breathing. My mother froze, her hands trembling, the shirt she was mending falling to the ground. My father lifted his head, his cloudy eyes widening, but he said nothing. Then my mother burst into tears, covering her face, muttering, "Elias, oh God, Elias, you're alive." I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. I just sat there staring at them, feeling like a stone was pressing down on my chest. "I survived," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I became successful, a US citizen, a millionaire, without any help from either of you." My father tried to say something, his voice catching. "Elias, we had no choice. We thought you'd be better off staying." But his excuses only fueled my anger. Better off? Abandoned at an airport, thrown into the foster system, bullied and rejected time and again, was that better off? My mother knelt down, grabbing my hand. "My son, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what you went through." She sobbed, but I pulled my hand away. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her belated apologies. "Where's Rosa?" I asked, my voice firm. "Where's my sister?" My mother looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Rosa, she's in Mexico. She's working in a place. It's not good. We couldn't help her. Elias, please find your sister. Save her." My heart felt like it was being torn apart. Rosa, the little girl with the radiant smile, was now living in a world I couldn't bear to imagine. I stood up, saying nothing more. "I'll find Rosa," I said, my voice like ice. "But not for you. For her." I left the shack without looking back. My mother's sobs echoed behind me, but I didn't stop. I had done what I came to do. I had shown them who I was. Now I had to find Rosa to pull her out of the darkness, just as I had done for myself. The journey to find Rosa began the moment I set foot in Mexico City. I hired a private investigator, a middle-aged man named Javier with sharp eyes and a deep voice. He warned me that finding a girl in Mexico's underworld wouldn't be easy, especially with just a name and a few vague memories. But I didn't give up. I gave Javier the only photo I had, a faded picture of Rosa as a child, clutching her cloth doll, standing next to me in the schoolyard in Honduras. "She's 26 now," I said, "but her smile, it's probably still the same." Javier worked quickly, but each passing day was one I spent in anxiety. I stayed in a small hotel working remotely with the Bright Path team, but my mind wasn't there. I thought of Rosa, of the years she had to grow up without me. My parents had left me at the airport, but at least I had Mama Elena, a chance to rise. What about Rosa? Did she have anyone to lean on? Every night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was too late. After 2 weeks, Javier called me. "I found a girl, Rosa Martinez, in a slum near Tijuana," he said. "But you should prepare yourself. Her situation, it's not good." I flew to Tijuana the next morning. The city was noisy, chaotic, with narrow streets and the smell of exhaust fumes mixed with garbage. Javier led me to a rundown neighborhood where crumbling buildings crowded together and women stood under dim streetlights, their eyes vacant. He pointed to a small house with a peeling red door. "She's in there," he said, "but be careful. The people running this place don't like outsiders." I walked in, my heart pounding. Inside, the air was stifling, heavy with the smell of alcohol and tobacco. An older woman, her face caked with makeup, stopped me. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm looking for Rosa Martinez," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm her brother." She eyed me suspiciously but led me through a dark hallway. When the final door opened, I saw Rosa, or rather the shadow of Rosa. She sat on an old bed, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, her face pale, her eyes empty. Her curly hair was matted, and the smile I once loved was gone. Her body was covered in bruises, as if life itself had beaten her down. "Rosa," I called, my voice choking. She looked up, her eyes dazed. Who's there?" she whispered, as if afraid to believe. "It's me, Elias," I said, kneeling in front of her. "Your brother. I'm here to take you home." Rosa stared at me, then burst into tears. She threw her arms around me, sobbing like a child. "Elias, brother Elias, I thought you were dead," she mumbled, her hands clutching my shirt. I hugged her, feeling as if I were holding my lost childhood. But at the same time, a surge of anger rose within me. Anger at my parents, at the world that let her end up here. Rosa told me everything through her sobs. After being taken back to Honduras, she lived with our parents in poverty. When she was 16, they could no longer afford to care for her. A man promised her a job in Mexico, but it was a trap. She was sold into a brothel, treated brutally, trapped in a world with no escape. "I wanted to die, Elias," she whispered. "But I remembered you. I thought if you were alive, you wouldn't let me stay here." I couldn't hold back my tears. I promised Rosa I'd get her out, that she'd have a new life. I paid a large sum to the woman running the place, calling it a ransom fee, though inside I wanted to tear the house apart. I took Rosa back to the hotel and called a doctor to care for her health. She was frail, depleted both physically and mentally, but I saw a faint spark in her eyes. The spark of the little girl who once sang our mother's songs. I brought Rosa back to the US, to San Francisco, where I arranged a small house for her and a team of doctors and therapists. Mama Elena welcomed Rosa like her own daughter, hugging her and crying, cooking hot meals. Isabella, now a teenager, held Rosa's hand and told her about her drawings. I watched Rosa, saw the faint smile slowly returning to her face, and knew I had done the right thing. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive our parents, the ones who let my sister fall into hell. Rosa began to heal, little by little. She learned to smile again, to trust, to live. But I knew that her scars and mine would never fully disappear. When I looked at Rosa, I saw myself in those dark years. I knew that to truly move forward, I had to do one final thing: tell my story, unhidden, unashamed. I sat down and wrote. I wrote about the 10-year-old boy abandoned at the airport, about the years in the foster system, about Mama Elena and the Garcia family who saved me, about the journey to becoming a millionaire, and about the search for Rosa. I wrote about the pain, the anger, and the flickers of hope that pulled me out of the darkness. When I finished, I sent the story to a major newspaper with a note. "Please share this story so kids like me know they're not alone." The story was published and it spread quickly. Millions read it, shared it, commented on it. I received letters from around the world, from kids in the foster system, from immigrants, from people who had been abandoned. They called me an inspiration, but I didn't feel like a hero. I was just Elias, someone who learned to stand up after being knocked down. The media invited me for interviews, and for the first time I spoke about my parents and Rosa on television. I didn't hide the truth, about being abandoned, about the pain, about the journey to find my sister. I didn't know if my parents saw the broadcast, but I hoped they did. I wanted them to know that Rosa and I had overcome not because of them, but despite them. One morning I took Rosa to Los Angeles International Airport, the place where it all began. We stood in the waiting area where I had sat crying 20 years ago, clutching my science book. Rosa held my hand, her eyes gentle but strong. "Brother Elias," she said, "thank you for finding me." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "I promised to protect you, Rosa, and I kept my word." We stood there, hand in hand, watching the flow of people passing by. I wasn't sure if I had forgiven my parents or not. Maybe I never would fully forgive them. But I knew I had moved on, past the pain, past the darkness, past the memories that once held me captive. The airport was no longer a place of abandonment. It was the place where Rosa and I started anew, together, free in our souls.